Episode 1. The day the mirror refused him. I shouldn't have looked in the mirror that morning. It was old, cracked along the corners like the skin of the elderly, hanging above the sink in the sacristy for decades. I had stared into it every day for 7 years, brushing my collar, fixing my hair, preparing my face to look holy. But that morning, the mirror refused me. There was no reflection, not a smudge, not a shimmer of light bouncing back, just the empty sink, the wall behind me, and the air where my head should have been. It wasn't glass anymore. It was absence. I blinked, moved my hand. Nothing moved back. My mouth fell open, no mouth in the mirror. I touched my cheek, but felt nothing but cold. My breath caught, but no breath fogged the surface. I stumbled back, knocking over the chalice on the counter. Wine spilled. The deep red ran like blood across the white linen, and for a moment, I thought I saw it drip upward. I whispered a prayer, but it sounded wrong in my mouth, like a voice not mine. I ran from the sacristy. No one saw. Morning light was breaking through the stained glass windows in splashes of holy fire. The congregation would be arriving in an hour, and I had no face. I tried another mirror in the hallway, nothing. My phone camera, blank, not even static, just void. That's when the panic began to crawl, not sprint crawl. Like 1,000 ants behind my eyes. I could feel my features, but no longer trust they were there. I ran to the confessional, not to hear a sin, to confess one. I don't even remember how I got there. My knees hit the wood floor, and I spoke to the screen in the darkness, knowing no one was on the other side. Or maybe someone always is. I need to confess, I whispered, shaking. I did something. Years ago, I buried it. I thought if I prayed hard enough. Silence. I was just a deacon then. The child came to me. He was crying. He said he saw the Virgin bleed from her eyes. Said she spoke to him. I told him to shut up. That was blasphemy. I struck him. Once, maybe twice. I left him there, alone, cold. He died that night. I waited. Still silence. Thin a breath. On the other side of the screen. Not mine. A deep, trembling breath, inhaled through rotten lungs, as if someone or something had been waiting for this moment. Then a whisper, now you see what I saw. The day I died. I screamed, and in that second, I felt my skin stretch, my features warp, my identity dissolve like ash in holy water. When I stumbled out of the booth, the candles in the sanctuary were all out, and everyone in the church turned to look at me, but not with recognition, with terror. Episode 2. The whisper that followed him home. I left the church with the collar still around my neck, and the weight of 1,000 silent stares clinging to my back like wet ropes. No one spoke to me. No one dared. The congregation parted like the Red Sea as I passed, some clutching their rosaries, others shielding their children's eyes. I didn't walk, he fled, into the fog-thick morning, past the cemetery where the boy was buried, though no one ever marked his grave. I told myself, I imagined the voice in the confessional, the words, the breath, the way it felt like it reached inside me and rearranged the bones of my name. But that night, oh God, that night the whisper returned. I live alone in a small rectory behind the chapel. No TV, no radio, no distractions. I always said silence made me feel closer to God. Now I know silence listens back. The whisper started at 2:33 a.m. Just 3 breaths past the witching hour. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to pray the nausea away, when I heard it, Father, a voice, faint and brittle, like dry leaves scraping across old wood. I sat up, heart hammering. Are you sorry yet? The words came from the corner of the room, the darkest corner, the one where the crucifix never stayed hung for more than a day. I turned on the light. Nothing, no one, but the whisper didn't stop. You left me cold. You let them bury me without a name. You forgot me. I pressed my palms against my ears. Still heard it. Inside. The whisper wasn't in the room. It was inside my head. I ran to the bathroom and flipped on the light. Again, the mirror showed no face. But now, something worse. Instead of my reflection, I saw a hallway, stone walls, a single flickering candle. At the far end, a door slowly creaking open. A boy stood in the doorway, small, barefoot, skin gray like ash, as black as ink and wet with grief, lips trembling, his mouth opened, and I heard the whisper in stereo, in the mirror, and in my skull, say my name. My stomach turned. I dropped to the floor and vomited bile. The lights blinked once, then went out. I crawled out of the bathroom. The whisper followed, room to room, whispering behind every door I passed, beneath the floorboards. From within the pages of my Bible, I tried to pray aloud, but the words wouldn't leave my tongue. Every psalm sounded like a lie. At dawn, I opened my front door and found a single object on my doorstep, a child's rosary, rust-stained, one bead missing, wrapped around a small cold bone. Episode 3. The choir that refused to sing. Sunday came again, and with it, my dread. I stood behind the curtain in the sacristy, hands shaking, lips dry, fingers still stained from the child's rosary I found days before. I had buried it deep in the garden, beneath the old statue of Saint Jude. But the whispers, they never left. They had grown bolder. Last night, I woke up to find muddy footprints circling my bed, small, bare, as if the child had never stopped walking. But Sunday demands its pageantry, and I had no choice but to perform. Mass must go on even if the priest has no face, no soul, and no salvation left to preach. That chapel was full. The faithful Saturday straight and still. No one looked at me, but everyone watched. Even the statues seemed to tilt slightly toward the pulpit, judging. Then came the moment that truly undid me. The choir, 12 children, dressed in white robes, halos of innocence above their heads. They always sang after the first scripture hymn to lift the heart and quiet the doubt. I raised my hand to cue them. Silence. I cleared my throat, forced a smile, and nodded again. Nothing. They stood motionless, pale, frowning. One of the girls, Maria, I think, began to cry, softly at first, then harder. Her shoulders shook as if she were about to vomit. Her mother, sitting in the third pew, rose to help her, but before she could move, all 12 children dropped to their knees at once, simultaneously, like puppets cut from their strings. And then they began to hum, not a melody, not a hymn. It was off-key, low, vibrating, like the sound of something ancient breathing beneath the earth. The congregation stiffened. Some crossed themselves. Others whispered prayers in Latin. Old honesty kind you only say when something unnatural enters sacred ground. My ears rang. I stepped back from the altar, and that's when the girl stood up. Maria, still crying, but her mouth was open, not singing, speaking, words not her own. He made me bleed in the dark. He told me I was lying. He buried me with no name. Every syllable hit like a hammer to the chest. The other children joined in, still kneeling, still humming, but now their voices layered over Maria's words like a chorus of mourning spirits. The walls groaned. The crucifix above the altar cracked. The Christ figure's eyes bleeding red wax, dripping onto the marble. Then silence, all at once. No music, no voices, no whisper. Just Maria, looking straight at me, eyes no longer hers. He wears my sin like a mask. I fled. Again, I didn't wait for the end of Mass, didn't offer the Eucharist, didn't bless the people, because how do you bless them when your hands are soaked in forgotten blood? I locked myself inside the rectory and wept until nightfall. When I opened my eyes, the church's bell was ringing, but no one was pulling the rope. Episode 4. The Bible that bleeds when touched. They told us the word is alive. I just never thought it could bleed. It began the morning after the choir incident. I hadn't slept. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that hum again, that death rattle that passed as a hymn. So I did what priests are taught to do when in doubt. I turned to scripture. I needed comfort, a sign, something divine to drown out the whispering that now pulsed with every beat of my heart. The Bible I used was older than me, bound in leather, the edges of its pages golden with age and reverence. It was my grandfather's, cast down through 3 generations of priests. It had never failed me until that day. I opened it to Psalm 51, have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love. But the pages were wrong. The verse wasn't there. Instead, the text had shifted, scrambled, like letters rearranged by a hand that hated God. Words twisted into something cruel, a single phrase repeated over and over across the thin paper. He speaks forgiveness with a rotten tongue. My mouth went dry. I turned the page. More of the same. His prayers are hollow bones. I slammed the Bible shut. My hands trembled, and Thinny felt it. Wet, warm, sticky. I looked down. My fingertips were dripping red. I opened the Bible again in a panic. A smear of blood had appeared across the center seam, leaking out from somewhere deep in the spine. It ran down the margins like tearsard. Thick, metallic, real. The sin hit me. Next run. Bulb wounds. And something else. Incense. Like the kind we used to burn during funeral rites. I dropped the book. It hit the floor with a wet slap, but it kept bleeding, forming a crimson pool beneath it. I backed away, breath shallow. It's raining. The whisper returned. Don't you remember what you did with this book? I shook my head violently. No, I don't. You used it to silence the child. My knees gave out. I fell, hands flipping and the blood on the floor. The Bible snapped open on its own. The pages turned with unnatural speed, fluttering like waves, then stopped on a page I didn't recognize. There was no chapter, no verse, only one sentence carved into the page in a deep, jagged scrawl. You buried the word with the boy. I screamed, not because I understood, but because, somewhere inside me, I did. The memory was still buried, but the guilt, it was already rising, like a body in floodwater. The next time I looked down, the blood was gone. The Bible Saturday perfectly clean, untouched, but on my palms, the prints were still stained red, and no matter how hard I washed, it wouldn't come off. Episode 5. The boy who knew his secret. He appeared during Thursday confession. A boy, no older than 10, thin, pale, as to knowing for a child. He didn't walk in with his parents. No footsteps, no sounds, just appeared. The moment he entered the booth, the air changed heavier, like breathing through wool. I leaned forward, fingers already trembling, heart slamming into my ribs like it wanted out. He didn't say, "Bless me, Father." He didn't need to. He already knew he wasn't the one confessing. I cleared my throat. How long has it been since your last confession? My child. Silence. Then a whisper, "You're calm, too steady. You should remember me." A chill ran up my spine. Have we met? Not like this. His voice was sharp, unnaturally still, like it wasn't speaking, just letting the words fall. You were younger, but crueler. I could feel my breath quicken, a phantom pressure build in my chest, like a rope being pulled tighter with each second. You told me to stop crying. You said the Virgin doesn't bleed, but she did. I gripped the edge of the seat, though it creaked beneath my fists. My voice cracked. Who are you? Silence. Then he whispered something that didn't sound like English. Not Latin either. Something older, words that scratched at my bums. I reached for the screen, desperate to see his face. But there was nothing. No silhouette, no form, just darkness. A void that pulsed, and then he heard it, breathing, right behind me. I turned. The confessional was empty, but when I looked for it again, the screen was gone. In its place was a wall of stone, wet, cracked, like I had been moved somewhere else entirely. The whisper came again, now from inside the stone. I died holding my truth. You buried it beneath your sermons. The wood beneath me splintered. The candle in the booth flickered and went out. I was alone, or I thought I was, until a child's hand slipped through the darkness and pressed a single object through the slot in the screen. A drawing, crayon on yellow paper. A church. A boy. A bleeding statue. And a priest with a face scratched out completely just like mine. The booth door slammed open on its own. I stumbled out, gasping for air. No one was there, only the scent of dirt and incense. I looked down. My shoes were covered in soil. And there, in the center aisle of the church, was a trail of muddy footprints, small, bare, leading from the front pew all the way to the altar. They stopped where the boy used to kneel. I picked up the drawing, now wet with something warm. Blood. No. Tears. Mine. But I couldn't remember crying. Episode 6. The Smiling Virgin. She was never supposed to smile. The statue of the Virgin Mary that stood in the chapel's apse had always worn the same expression, somber, compassionate, eternally grieving. Her downcast eyes, carved in marble, seemed to mourn the world and every sin it refused to confess. But not that night. That night, she smiled. It was subtle at first. Barely a shift in the lips. I noticed it after locking the church, walking alone through the pews, trying to calm the tremble in my hands from the drawing the boy had left me. I passed the statue, as I always did, and frowned. See, something was wrong. I stepped closer. Her mouth was slightly upturned, barely there, but unmistakable. I blinked, thinking it was a trick of light. It wasn't. The Virgin Mary was smiling at me, and it wasn't kind. It was the kind of smile you'd see in the seconds before a flame touched flesh. I backed away, thin a whisper, not from the shadows, from her. You told him I was silent. I stumbled into a pew, gripping the wood like it could save me. No, I whispered, this isn't real. But the smile grew, wider, crooked, no longer gentle, and her head shifted, just slightly, tilted, toward me. He came to you shaking, and you mocked him? I shut my eyes. No, please. He saw me weep, and you called it imagination. The candles surrounding the statue flickered violently. The room turned cold, as if every ounce of grace had been sucked from its walls. I opened my eyes and saw it. Blood. Thin lines of blood leaking from the corners of her eyes. Not like tears, like cracks, as if the marble was splitting from something burning inside. He was chosen to witness, but you silenced him to protect your role. The air shifted. I looked down. The floor beneath the statuette, and moving, I stepped closer, despite every instinct screaming at me not to. It wasn't water. It was oil. Thick, dark, sacred. The kind used only once a year in the sick. Not dying, it poured around the statue's feet, then began to rise up her pedestal, dripping down her robes, until it reached her smile, and stopped. Then a final whisper, softer than breath. He saw me smile before I broke, and her lips cracked. The smile vanished, replaced by a screen frozen in stone. Her face shattered right in front of me. The sound echoed through the empty chapel like a gunshot from heaven itself. I fell to my knees, not in prayer, in guilt, because I remembered something I had buried long ago. He had come to me trembling, and I had told him the Virgin doesn't cry, that God doesn't whisper to boys like him, that truth only comes through the pulpit. And now, my pulpit was haunted by the silence I forced into him, by a smile I was never meant to see. Episode 7. The confession that wasn't his. It was never supposed to be recorded. Confessions are secret, unwritten, unheard by anyone but God. But someone had left a tape on my pillow. A black cassette. No label, no handwriting, just a date scrawled across the plastic in dried red ink. October 11th. I stared at it for hours before sliding it into the old player in my study. That tape hissed, thin voice. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I frowned. See, it wasn't just similar, it was identical. My voice, my tone, my cadence, even the quiet throat clearing I always did before speaking. But I had no memory of recording it, no memory of ever saying what came next. I saw him fall. I didn't help. I thought he was lying. I thought if I ignored him, the visions would stop. I pressed pause. My hands shook. I didn't remember this, not this way. I thought he had died from the cold, alone, lost, delusional. But this version of Memphis other me was confessing something different. A choice. He begged me to tell someone. He said she was bleeding, said the statue moved, cried, smiled. I told him to pray harder, and I left him there. I rewind, play, pause, over and over. The voice was always mine, but the words were someone else's memory, or maybe someone else's revenge. They were static, and the sound of weeping, but not from me. A child, a quiet sobbing, distant at first, then closer, and then layered over it a whisper. This confession isn't yours, but it belongs to your soul. The lights flickered. Something moved in the hallway. I pressed eject. The cassette was gone. I blinked. My palms were empty, but the player was still running, still spinning a tape that wasn't there. And from the speakers, breathing, shallow, raspy, familiar. I turned around, and standing in the doorway was me, but not as I am now, as I was then, young, clean-shaven, in deacon's robes, face untouched by guilt, except the eyes. They were wrong, empty, reflecting nothing, and bleeding, low, thick tears down both cheeks. Here it opened his mouth, and the same words from the tape spilled out again. I saw him fall. I didn't help. I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. When I looked up, The doorway was empty, but the weeping hand stopped. It was coming from inside the walls. I rushed to the church. The pews were empty, the air cold. The confessional door stood open. Inside nothing, except a single strip of cassette tape, stretched across the kneeler like a serpent. I stepped in, entered it play again. In my head, you didn't speak for him in life. Now he speaks for you in death. I screamed, not in fear, in recognition, because I wasn't the only one wearing my voice. No, so was he. Episode 8, The Shadow in the Pew. You know the feeling of being watched. It's subtle, like the air has weight, and silence, rose teeth. I had begun holding mass again, not because I wanted to, because something insisted I did. The town had turned on men outwardly, but they looked through me now, like my presence was expected but no longer trusted, like I had become part of the ritual, not the reason for it. But every Sunday, without fail, he was there, always in the fifth pew, far left side, alone, not a boy, not a man, a shadow. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, how the stained glass distorted shape and color. But light doesn't hold still like that. Light doesn't lean forward when you speak the word salvation. Light doesn't nod when you say he died for our sins. And light doesn't blink, but he did. I never saw him arrive, never saw him leave. Just there, week after week, same pew, same stillness. Until one Sunday, I broke the rules. I stepped down from the pulpit mid-sermon and walked out. Hello, careful. The congregation held their breath. No one looked at me, only him, or rather space he occupied. Because as I drew closer, I realized the pew beneath him was untouched. No pressure on the wood, no indent in the cushion. And yet, I could see him clearly. Black suit, head bowed, hands folded, like a good Catholic boy. I stopped beside him. I wanted to ask something, anything, but my voice caught in my throat. That's when he turned his head, slowly, and I saw nothing, not a face, just void, a swirling emptiness, darker than shadow. Where a mouth should have been, there was a seam stitched up with what looked like rosary thread. Where I should have been, candle wicks, burning silently. The space around him pulsed. The crucifix above the altar cracked, and in my ears, a voice. You preached while I rotted. You broke bread while I broke. I stumbled backward. The congregation didn't move, didn't flinch, because they hadn't seen him. Only me, talking to empty space, laughing, crying, bleeding from the nose. When I looked again, the pew was empty, but something was left behind. A missal, one of the old ones. Pages yellowed, words faded. I opened it. Every page was blank, except the last, written in red, in a child's hand. Your sermons never saved me, but your silence damned you. That night, I locked the church, but the fifth pew remained lit, just one candle, burning, with no flame. Episode 9, The Flesh on the Altar. It was supposed to be bread, just bread, but when I lifted the veil from the chalice and patted the morning, I saw Avro, faint, still warm, not dough, not host, flesh, human, wet, pulsing with memory. I staggered back, knocking over the silver cruet. The wine spilled across the marble like blood, spinning toward judgment. And for the first time since I donned this collar, I felt afraid of the altar. I dared to look again. It was a slice of skin, about the size of my palm. Edges ragged, cinder burned with a symbol I almost recognized. A small cross, wrapped in thorns, and something else. Letters, faint, Latin. I leaned in. Redemptus per ignem, redeemed by fire. The phrase, I'd read it once before, long ago, in a report we were ordered to destroy, about a child who claimed to see the Virgin smile just before he collapsed in front of the statue and screamed a prayer no one understood. We dismissed him as disturbed. I never asked what they did with the body. Now I knew. You used my flesh for the altar. A whisper echoed inside me. So I will make your altar remember me. I looked up. The crucifix above the sanctuary bled. Not from the hands, not from the feet, from the eyes. Thin black rivulets ran down the face of Christ, dripping into the chalice below, which now shook without being touched. I turned to run only to see the pews filled, not with the living, with those I had forgotten. Children, pale, silent, watching, each with lips sewn shut by rosary beads. each holding a missile, and on every cover, the same Latin phrase burned in rather than printed. I screamed, "What do you want from me?" The candle flames leaned toward me, as if pulled by breath. The altar whispered, "You can't preach forgiveness if you never saw it." Suddenly, the flesh on the pattern curled at the edges, burned, and from the flame, smoke rose in it upward, inward. It slithered toward me, slid into my mouth, my nose, my eyes. I choked, fell to my knees, and for a moment he saw the boy, kneeling alone in the dark chapel, eyes wide, mouth open, begging the Virgin not to leave him. Me, standing in the doorway, turning away, and fire, not of this world, something ancient, consuming him, and I said nothing, not then, not ever. When I awoke, I was lying flat on the altar. My vestments were soaked. My hands smelled of incense and rot. The congregation was gone, but carved into the stone beneath me, indeed, bleeding grooves, was a single sentence. The sacrifice was never bred. Episode 10, The Woman Who Never Died. I saw her in the rain, veiled, still, standing at the cemetery gate. It had been storming for hours, the kind of rain that seemed biblical, as if heaven was trying to wash something terrible from the earth. I had just left the chapel, still dizzy from the vision on the altar, when I saw her silhouette beneath the rusted archway. At first, I thought she was a mourner, maybe lost, maybe grieving, but she wasn't holding flowers. She was holding a crucifix, upside down, dripping. My instincts said run, but guilt has its own gravity, and I was already too deep. I stepped toward her, mud sucking at my shoes with every step. "Are you all right, ma'am?" She didn't speak, didn't move. The veil covering her face was soaked, but her body was dry and touched by the rain. As she lifted her head, and I remembered her, not her name, not her voice, her confession. It was years ago. She had come into my booth, with shaking hands and a secret stitched into her throat. She said she had witnessed a miracle or a curse. The statue wept, the boy screamed, and the church swallowed the truth. She begged me to tell someone, to write it down, to make sure his voice didn't disappear. I told her to forget it. That grief played tricks on the mind. She never came back, until now. She finally lifted the veil, and my soul frowned. See, she hadn't aged. Not a wrinkle, not a line, not a moment of time passed, but her eyes were glass, reflective, black, as if they'd seen too much and were emptied by it. "Do you remember me now, Father?" Her voice was sharp as broken window glass. I nodded. "I remember what I told you. I was wrong." She smiled, but it wasn't kind. "No, you were faithful. You obeyed the silence. That's why I never died. I felt the cold reach my bones. You see, I tried to carry your story, but you buried it. And when truth is buried in holy ground, it doesn't rot, it grows." I stepped back. She held out the crucifix. It was bent, melted, still warm. He tried to show me the Virgin's smile. I saw it once, just before she closed her eyes. The air around us twisted. The rain began to fall upward. The sky cracked in silence. And Finny saw the cemetery behind her, down scenes of graves, unmarked, unkindled, forgotten, and from each mound, a rosary rose from the dirt, like weeds choking the dead. Each bead was blackened, each cross inverted, and on every tag, no name. "Whose are they?" I asked, voice trembling. She stepped aside. "Everyone you silenced." She turned, walked through the gate, into the cemetery, and vanished, not behind a tree, not behind a stone, into the ground, like the earth had taken her back. That night, I dug where she'd stood, and found no bones, just a single page from a Bible, burned at the edges, the words smeared except one sentence, untouched by time. "I will raise what man has buried." Episode 11, The Bell That Rang Only for Him. The bell tower hasn't rung in years. Its rope was cut after the funeral of Father Esteban, a man who vanished from his own coffin the night before burial. The townfolk claimed it was age that made the tower moan in the wind. But those of us who live with guilt know better. The bell never truly died. It just waited for a name worth ringing for, or perhaps a sin. Tonight, it rang 3 times. No wind, no rope, no hands. Just boom, 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 like judgment knocking from above. I bolted upright in my bed, heart already racing before my eyes even opened. The church stood silent in the distance, but that sound still echoed through the walls of my room, like it was inside me now, like it had always been. The whispers had stopped. For the first time in weeks, no voices, just the bell, calling. I dressed in silence. The mirror, as always, refused to show me. I no longer expected a reflection, only the faint hum of something old watching from beyond the glass. I stepped into the night. Fog curled around the chapel like a cloak. The air smelled of candle wax and ash. The tower loomed above, crooked against the moonlight. Its silhouette was broken like the steeple had been bent under the weight of too many forgotten prayers. As I approached, I saw the door at the base was open, not wide, just enough for someone like me to slip in. I did. The stairs groaned as I ascended, each step a memory I didn't want to face. The rope had long been severed, but the bell, enormous, rusted, etched with unreadable Latin, was still there, and it was moving, swaying gently, not by force, by will, and beneath it, carved into the wooden floor, was a circle of symbols I had seen only once before in the flesh left on my altar. Redemptus per ignem, redeemed by fire, and in the center of the circle, a boy, kneeling, eyes closed. His lips were moving silently, praying. I knew that face. I had buried that face. The boy who once begged me to believe. I whispered his name, though I don't remember ever knowing it. It came from somewhere deeper than memory. He opened his eyes. They were completely white, and when he spoke, the bell swung, hardens, twice louder than before. You hear it now, don't you? He said. It never rang for God. It rings for guilt. I stepped forward. What do you want from me? To kneel. The bell swung again. To listen. Again. To confess not what you did. It swung violently now, shaking the walls, rattling my bones. But what you let become holy. And then silence. The boy vanished. The symbols burned black, and I was alone in the tower until I heard the final chime. But this time I didn't come from above. It came from within my chest. Episode 12. The sin that had no name. There are sins that wound the soul, sins that break the body, and then there are sins that erase the name from heaven itself. Mine was the third kind. I didn't know it, not fully, not until tonight, not until the Bible I carried. Since seminary crumbled in my hands like ash, and inside, between the blank, brittle pages, I found it, a page that was never meant to exist, unnumbered, unwritten, untouched, yet somehow alive. The letters didn't sit on the paper. They moved, squirmed, like maggots feeding on holy ink. But I read them anyway, and the words were not a story, not a psalm. They were a warning. Woe to the shepherd who buries revelation. Woe to the mouth that silences a miracle to preserve power. Woe to the one who clothes sacrilege in the vestments of reason. And beneath it all, burned deep into the parchment, as if carved by fire, this sin has no name, because even hell cannot speak it. I dropped the page, but it didn't fall. It clung to my hand like skin. I tore it away, but the letters had already bled into my palm. The ink seeped through my veins, scorching every nerve as it traveled up my arm, across my chest, and finally to my throat. That's when the voices returned. Not whispers, screams, children crying, praying, dying, all layered over one another in a symphony of agony. Their voices filled the chapel, the tower, the walls of the rectory, until they filled me. I stumbled toward the altar, dragging my body like a penance. The lights above flickered, candles went out in unison, and then he appeared, the boy, standing where I once stood, behind the altar. Only now, he wasn't a boy, he was something else. His eyes were golden replaced with burning crosses. His skin glowed with scripture that twisted and rewrote itself each time I blinked. And in his hands, he held something wrapped in linen. He unwrapped it slowly, and there it was, my face, not a metaphor, not a vision, my actual face, pale, hollow, eyes open, lips cracked, still, as if waiting for someone to give it meaning. You gave up your face the day you gave up your witness, the boy said. I fell to my knees. I was afraid. You were proud. I didn't know. You chose not to know. He held the face closer. It began to rot, skin bubbling, eyes sagging, as if even time itself refused to remember me. And, he pressed it to my own. but it didn't return. It burned. The pain was unbearable, holy, like fire blessed by wrath itself. I screamed, not in fear, in truth, because I finally understood. It wasn't the silence that damned me. It was the moment I heard a miracle and called it madness. Episode 13. The day he confessed again. I returned to the confessional, barefoot and bleeding. It was morning, but the sky above the chapel stayed black, like even the sun had turned its face away from this place. The pews were empty, but I could feel them watching. Not the people, the sins. They had gathered, waiting, and he had come to confess again. I opened the door to the confessional. The wood groaned like it remembered my weight, like it resented it. Inside, there was thick with incense and rot. The screen to the other side was closed, just as it had been the first time. The day I lost my face, the day I gave up truth. I knelt, and for the first time in years, I spoke the ancient words that out of obligation, but out of a need so deep it felt like vomiting the soul. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. No response, only silence, and then a breath, not mine, low, hollow, as if drawn through a mouth filled with dust. And a voice, do you know your sin? It wasn't God's voice. It wasn't the devil's either. It was mine, utter, burnt, echoing with centuries of shame. I clenched my fists. I buried a child's miracle. I mocked what I couldn't explain. I let my collar outweigh my conscience. And what was the name of the sin? I swallowed hard, because I knew it now. The sin that had no name. The sin so holy in appearance. It was never questioned. I called silence obedience. The booth shuddered. The wood cracked at the edges, and the screen slowly slid open. I stared and saw myself, not just a reflection, not just a ghost, me, before the forgetting, before the rot, before the whisper. But this version of me had no eyes, just holes, black. Ifedak, he leaned in. And what penance do you offer? I reached into my robe and pulled out the only thing I had left me, collar. Stained, torn, no longer white. I placed it on the ledge between us. I will never wear what I used to hide. The figure nodded slowly, and then it smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile the Virgin wore before her face cracked, the kind children see in nightmares wrapped in stained glass. He spoke, then speak once more, not as a priest, not as a coward, but as the child you silenced. I trembled, and in that trembling he remembered everything. His name, his voice, his blood, the miracle, the fire. And I repeated his final words, the ones he had cried before the church swallowed them whole. She smiled before the end. The booth burst into light, not flames, not heat, revelation, the kind that sears, the kind that saves. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since this began, I saw my face, not in the mirror, not in the world, but in the forgiveness I was never meant to earn.
Epilogue, the record that heaven erased. The church is gone now. Not destroyed. Not burned. Erased. Where the chapel once stood, stone. Stained glass. Tower, there is only scorched earth and silence. Even the road that led to it, forgotten. But I'm still here. Not as a priest. Not anymore. I walk through towns where no one knows my name. And yet, they feel it. In their bones. Children stop and stare. Dogs growl low in their throats. Old women clutch their rosaries when I pass. I don't blame them. Because I carry something now. Something I didn't ask for, but deserve. A month after I left the confessional for the last time, I received a letter. No return address. No postage. Just my name. Inside was a single photograph, aged. Curled at the corners. Ink smudged. It showed a boy kneeling at the altar. Alone. A statue of the Virgin behind him. Her smile fractured. And beneath the image, in handwriting I recognized as my own, he spoke the truth. And I erased him. There was also a page. A torn sheet of thin, yellowed parchment, like the kind used in old Vatican records. On it, one line. Typed. This confession has been removed from the book of heaven. And below it, blank space. White. Infinite. As if the paper refused to hold the memory any longer. As if heaven itself had chosen amnesia. I went to the Vatican. I don't know why. Maybe to beg. Maybe to warn. I told them everything. They smiled politely, took my statement, offered me a room. That night, I found the archivist's wing. Room after room of sacred records, buried confessions, secret miracles, names of the damned. And in one locked drawer, I found it. The file with my name, stamped in red. Void. Inside. Nothing. No dates. No photos. No transcripts. Only a sliver of mirror. Cracked. I held it up to my face. And once again, I saw nothing. Because forgiveness is not a guarantee. And memory is not mercy. Somewhere out there, I believe the boy still walks. Not a ghost. Not a demon. But a record. A living reminder of what happens when truth is silenced in God's house. He does not speak. He does not scream. He simply watches. Waits. For the next silence. For the next priest who chooses power over pain. For the next miracle that is too inconvenient to believe. And when he finds it, the bell will ring again. Only once. And the name it tolls for will vanish. Like mine.